Moving on to the next set, and it's chronologically, it's in order in which they really lived, they were alive, that I've been trying to keep the order of these pre-Socratic philosophers. We're going to move on to Pythagoras and Xenophanes. If you think about, they're almost transitional characters in the story. Now, Pythagoras, as I said, not much was known about him, but with regard to reality, which things are real. Remember, all you guys know the Pythagorean theorem is the thing that he came up with, as a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and c being the hypotenuse of the right triangle, the length of the hypotenuse squared is equal to the square of the two sides. Okay, he certainly was a person who found that mathematics could explain everything. So when we're looking at ontology, the things that were real for Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans were what you might call mathematical entities, concepts, triangles, numbers, and those were the real things, not the stuff that you saw around the world. That stuff that you saw around the world wasn't real, but everything in the world was determined by and accounted for by the real things, the numbers. You can explain all of reality in terms of mathematics. I mean, it was it went so far that, or at least should say, Pythagoras went so far that he was able to explain music, the way things sound, what's called harmonics, the way chords work in mathematical terms. Now, the other thing that he thought was, and he's responsible for, or he's at least it's attributed to him, is the idea that people have souls. That is, that after death something goes on, something lives on, and what lives on is your soul. It lives on after the death of your body. Kind of an interesting doctrine. He also thought that things were, there was a process of what might be called transmigration, that you were reborn, reincarnated time after time, your soul was reborn into another body. This is something that certainly Socrates and Plato later picked up on. Now, if you hold those positions, well, you seem to, and as I said, we don't have a lot written about what Pythagoras in fact said. In fact, virtually nothing. We know that there were Pythagoreans. He was certainly an intellectual giant in that era. Unfortunately, we don't have any of his writings that survive. But if you think about it from the perspective of epistemology, it looks like he is a rationalist. Right? Reason, numbers, you can reason your way to what ultimately exists. So reason is what ultimately yields knowledge, as opposed to experience and observation. Now let's move on and just quickly talk about Xenophanes. Now notice Xenophanes is the first guy that I have something in the other column about, because Xenophanes is really known for the most part because of his views on philosophy of religion. And philosophy of religion is one of those fields where some of the questions in philosophy of religion have to do with metaphysics, some of them with epistemology, some of them with ethics. I mean, just to remind you guys, I probably mentioned it. I should have mentioned it in an earlier lecture. In philosophy of religion, you have a metaphysical question: is there a supreme being? Is there a God? In the area of epistemology, does anybody know that God exists? Is there any reason for thinking that a God exists? And in the area of ethics, people assume that there are absolute values. Well, they claim that the only way there can be absolute values is if there's a God that does it. But with regard to philosophy of religion or theology, Xenophanes takes the position that that Homer and Hesiod can't possibly be right. Why? Because a God is an all-powerful being, and you can only have one most powerful being, so you can't have multiple gods. So he gave an argument, kind of a rationalist argument, for for monotheism, that there is one God has to exist. I guess you don't get an argument that God has to exist, period, but he says if there is a God, there could only be one God. And it looks like in the field of knowledge and skepticism, Xenophanes kind of known for applying the laws of reason, rational thought, maybe the laws of logic to areas, even areas like philosophy or religion. So at least in this regard, he thinks that you can know things based on religion, and based on, reason. And you can even know things about the gods, and he thinks he's proved something about Homer and Hesiod in that way.